Damn it, why are you recording? I'm fighting with you, trying to get the angle right. I think it's because, like, maybe the camera has, like, a squeeze sensitive thing where it's like, hey, I've just been squeezed, let me start recording. That's not what I want you to do. Because then I put it in the clamp. It's a phone, okay? I use a phone because I'm cheap. I mean, I'm not cheap, but I'm cheap at recording this stuff. Not cheap at... oh, the shit behind me. That ain't cheap.
I recently took my family to Japan on a 2-week vacation. While I was there, I went to a whole bunch of retro video game stores, and I picked up an absurd amount of video games. This is part 4, the final part, of my Japan retro video game pickups.
Winds of Thunder for the SuperGrafx. Lords of Thunder is a legendary side-scrolling shmup for the Turbo Duo. It's a game I never bought back in the day because I never owned a Turbo Duo. Today, it's incredibly expensive. At the time of this recording, it's going for about $800 on eBay complete in box, which is way more than I'm willing to spend for an individual title. Winds of Thunder is the name the game had in Japan, and while it's still pretty expensive, it's nowhere near as expensive as the US version. So when I found it in Japan, and for about $40 less than on eBay, I snatched it up. This game is utterly gorgeous and a real testament to the power of the TurboGrafx hardware. Sprites are large and detailed, backgrounds are lush, and the soundtrack is excellent. In the game, you play as a knight named Landis, and you fight your way through 7 stages. Landis can equip different elemental-based armors in the game that change both your attacks and your defense. Between missions, you can purchase power-ups in a shop using currency that is dropped in-game. This is honestly my only regret in getting the Japanese version of the game, as the item descriptions are all in Japanese, and I do not read Japanese. I intend to apply an English translation patch to the game on my Polymega eventually. Winds of Thunder is one of the long-shot games I was hoping to find, but wasn't expecting to find it in the price range I really wanted. It's awesome that I managed to not only find it, but come in under budget on it. Puyo CD for the PC Engine. Puyo is one of those franchises I really love. Like most Westerners, I was first exposed to it when they released Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine for the Sega Genesis in the 90s. That game was Puyo, but with the characters altered to become Sonic the Hedgehog villains. Over the years, I've gone back and got many of the Puyo games that never came out in the States. This one isn't one that I was specifically looking for, but I can't pass up a Puyo game I've never seen before, so I bought it. Puyo CD, as far as I can tell, seems to just be Puyo 2, but with a CD-based soundtrack and ported to the PC Engine. I may be wrong, however, so feel free to correct me in the comments. Puyo 2 is one of my favorite games of the series, so I don't remotely regret getting it. It's really fun stuff. Puyo Sun for the Sega Saturn. Hey look, another Puyo game. Like I said, I really love these games. Puyo Sun is the third game in the series. This is the Saturn port, and was one of the games I was looking for, unlike Puyo CD for the PC Engine. Puyo Sun came out for a variety of systems including the PlayStation and the N64, but the Saturn version is the one I really wanted. The game never came out west, even though many of the others have over the years, and as such, it was a high priority for me to find. The Saturn version has an animated full-motion video intro that is chock full of all that glorious 1990s full-motion video goodness. Magician Lord for the Neo Geo. I have never owned a Neo Geo. When the system launched in the 90s, it was entirely too expensive for me to even consider. Later on, in the early 2000s, I encountered a Neo Geo at Bookman's in Tucson, Arizona, for about $100, which was an incredible deal. However, I was a full-time student at the university, and my budget was pretty lean, so I didn't get it. I've always regretted that because the system only went up in value afterwards. Fortunately, the Polymega can play Neo Geo CD games, so while I was in Japan, I decided to pull the trigger on a couple of Neo Geo CD games. Magician Lord was the first one I purchased, and while it was still pretty pricey, it was way less than the US version. This game was one of the launch titles for the Neo Geo. It's a side-scrolling action platformer where you play as a magician who goes up against an evil sorcerer who has stolen a handful of magical tomes and is using them to wreak havoc. You can collect power-ups that transform you into a variety of different characters, including a fire-breathing lizard man and a ninja. It's a pretty fun game, but its gameplay hasn't aged as gracefully as other games of the era. As a result, it does feel clunky to play in 2024. Additionally, since this was originally an arcade game, it has that same unfair arcade difficulty that so many games had at the time, which was designed to encourage the player to keep pumping quarters into the machine. This style of gameplay never translated well to home consoles, and it feels particularly bad for a 90s game to have it. All that being said, it's a good game, and definitely a classic that I'm happy to finally own. Samurai Spirits for the Geo CD. Alright, another Geo game. Back in the 90s, Street Fighter by Capcom launched a fighting game craze. If you weren't around at the time, or you weren't as clued into the arcade scene, you might not remember just how insane it all was. Everyone wanted to play these games. You'd see people lined up to play versus matches, with quarters placed in a row on the bezel indicating intent to play. And the popularity of the games meant that you'd find them outside of arcades, in stores and fast food places. It was wild. Because of the explosive popularity of fighting games, game companies started churning them out in droves. Some companies practically made it their thing. One such company was SNK, and they produced a ton of different fighting game franchises for the Geo. What was crazy was, even though they were spitting out fighting games at a breakneck pace, their fighting games were generally really awesome. This is one of the more well-known Geo fighting games, and has been ported to dozens of platforms over the years, and spawned many sequels. Samurai Spirits is the name of the game in Japan, while out west, this game was called Samurai Showdown, with Showdown misspelled. There may be a reason for that misspelling that I don't know of, but personally I've always found it a little bit weird. The most notable feature this fighting game had was the cinematic camera that zooms in and out of the action when the fighters get close. This is achieved through sprite and background scaling, which was something most hardware at the time couldn't do. As a result, it was visually stunning for a fighting game in the 90s. Mystical Ninja Kirakira for the Super Famicom. Okay, so the name that I gave in the intro isn't technically the correct name for this game. The series is called Ganbare Goemon in Japan, while the few games that came out west were called Mystical Ninja. This particular game has a very long Japanese name that I would undoubtedly butcher, so I am just calling it by the name that many Westerners who cannot pronounce the original name use. There were many games in this series. Quite a few of them came out west and were much beloved. Sadly, this one, which was considered the best in the series on the Super Famicom, was never released outside of Japan, so I made it a goal to find the game while I was there. In the game, you play as Goemon, a character loosely based on a thief from Japanese folklore, with an almost Robin Hood-like flair to him. Gameplay consists of areas where you explore and interact with NPCs, as well as 2D platforming sections. Unfortunately for me, the game is a lot more text-heavy than I anticipated, and I cannot follow it at all. Thus far, I've had great difficulty even figuring out what to do without resorting to a guide. When I get serious about playing the game outside of just capturing footage for this video, I will likely have to apply an English translation patch. Super Bomberman 5 for the Super Famicom. I'm a big fan of the Bomberman series and have managed to get my daughter into the games as well. Astute viewers will notice that in every single one of the videos I've uploaded in this series, I've included footage of my daughter and I playing a Bomberman game in an arcade in Japan. Super Bomberman 5 is the 5th game for the Super Famicom and is widely considered the best one. It also never came out west, which, truthfully, is a bit of a tragedy. The Bomberman games have you control the titular Bomberman as he uses his bombs to destroy enemies in single-screen levels. Generally, there are blocks between you and the enemies you need to destroy, so you must make a path to the enemies by exploding said blocks. Often these blocks will hide power-ups that you can gather, which do things like make your explosions bigger and give you more bombs to drop at once. Super Bomberman 5 was notable for having a non-linear single-player game where you can take branching paths to the ending. The multiplayer game is where I will be spending most of my time, as I will be primarily playing this game with my daughter. This game was one of the ones I was really hoping to get, and I'm really glad I managed to find it.
Alright, so this is the end of the video. I've already talked about all of the games that I was really interested in talking about. Basically everything that I thought might be interesting to see the gameplay of and have a little bit of an explanation of, I've already talked about. That being said, I actually did get quite a few more games that weren't in these videos. And very briefly, I'm just going to show them and not necessarily talk too much about them, or try not to. I do have a tendency to be verbose, but I'll try not to talk too much about them. Basically because I do want to be complete, and I want to at least mention every video game that I did get. So, starting with Afterburner for the PC Engine. I didn't show this one because I'm not sure this works. Basically, I put it in, and it glitches out, and no matter how much I try to clean the contacts, it doesn't seem to really work. I mean, you can play the game, but like all the sprites are messed up. So, this one might have been a bust. I think this might be the only one I got that doesn't work. So, honestly, pretty good. I also got this for the 3DO. I have to be honest, I don't know what this game is. I'm not even certain it's a exclusive to Japan. It was also super cheap. It was only 900 yen. So it was like a cheap gamble. It looks like it's a first-person shooter. I have Googled and translated the title, but like I did that in Japan, and I don't remember what it was. And clearly, I haven't even opened it to play it, so I don't even know if it works. So I got this. It's a 3DO title. I also got a handful of Game Boy games. I mentioned that I got Parodius Da for the Game Boy, but I didn't include any gameplay footage of it. I also got this one, which is another one of these that I looked up the title and I don't remember what it was. Honestly, I can't really figure out how to play this game. So this was one of those games where it's like, ooh, this looks kind of cool. I'm just going to get it. But I don't really know how to play it. It vaguely plays like Mario versus Donkey Kong, but there's like these extra combat elements to it. You have to, I don't know if you can see in these little screens, but like you're collecting stuff and this big dude comes out of the side and like starts causing mayhem. And you can make these platforms fall, and if they fall, they can kill him. And I think that's what advances the stage. But I have to be honest, I couldn't really tell what like the completion criteria was. So I didn't talk about this one because I don't know enough about it. I also got a third Game Boy one, but I couldn't find it before filming this. I think it's in my Analog Pocket case. It might even be in the Analog Pocket because it honestly was the one that I enjoyed the most, which is hilarious because I don't even remember what it's called to talk about. So, I also bought a bunch of Famicom games. Most of these are not exclusives. There's a couple of exclusives in here that are kind of cool, but they're not that interesting. For example, there's a Karateka port. This is actually a really great Karateka port. I didn't go to Japan thinking I wanted to buy this, but when I saw it, I was like, oh, hell yeah. Karateka for the Famicom? I'm on board with that. But I didn't include it in the footage because, nobody cares. This is another exclusive. This is actually an exclusive that I really did want to get. This is Ball Blazer for the Famicom. If you remember, if you follow my channel and you've seen recent videos, you might have saw a What Am I Playing video from like a month ago where I was playing the 7800 version of Ball Blazer with my daughter. I love Ball Blazer. It's a great multiplayer competitive game. The NES port is kind of, or this isn't the NES. This is the Famicom. The Famicom port is kind of hot garbage. The Ball Blazer game, it took advantage of vertical line interrupts to do this really cool grid effect to make it so that the field seems 3D. And they try to reproduce it here, but because this system doesn't have the ability to do that the vertical line interrupt the same way that the 8-bit Atari platforms could, it's sluggish. It's like the frame rate isn't great, which is hilarious because like the Famicom was way more powerful as a system than the Atari systems were. But because the Atari systems had this one little quirk that game developers could take advantage of, it made that game so that it was better on the Atari, or better on the Atari than it was on like the Famicom. But I did get it. This is another one of those games that I was like looking for it everywhere, and I found it the day before we left. I was thrilled. But I didn't include it because I already talked about the Atari 8-bit Atari version is better, and I've already talked about that. I didn't really want to spend any time on that. The other exclusive I got was Ninja Jajarmaru. It's also one that I got fairly cheap. 800 yen, not bad. I didn't talk about it because, while it is a Famicom exclusive, it's a port of an arcade game. And while it is a Famicom exclusive, and it's a really good game, I really love it, you can get it these days. There's a Ninja Jajarmaru collection for the Switch that includes this and all of the sequels and a new, like, modern reimagining of this. And so, I mean, why talk about it? It's whatever. And then the other ones that I got were ones that weren't exclusive, but I got them because they were interesting to me. I got Donkey Kong. Now, this one was, of course, this came out in the States on the NES, but the thing that's interesting about this one is that this is actually a slightly earlier revision of the Famicom code, because this came out before the NES even was a thing. And so there's some real subtle code differences between the two. I think it's mostly stability, but it's not really enough to really talk about. So I just got it because it's like, oh man, look, really early Famicom cart. Look, that's freaking awesome. And then the other two I got were a couple of Namco ones, Pac-Man and Galaxian. I think I have Pac-Man already on the NES, and I don't know if this is any different from the NES one. I don't have Galaxian. I do have Galaga, but I got them. They're like these little numbers on them, like 01 and 02, and I don't know what that means, but I just thought they were cool, and they were also pretty cheap, so I picked them up. But yeah, that's it. That's all the games that I got in Japan. It was a great trip. Had a lot of fun. I'd like to go back. Not for many years, though, because it was an expensive trip. I don't need that again. Anyway, see ya.